Damn it, this can't be happening. Charles Langford's voice exploded through the glass walls of his 40th floor office, echoing like thunder across the sterile silence of Langford and Comfort. The CEO, known for his calm under pressure, was now pacing furiously, his perfectly tailored suit stained with sweat. In 45 minutes, representatives from Société Médicale de Lyon would arrive for the company's most critical negotiation in its 30-year history, a $1 million contract that could save or sink them. But the professional French translator had just canceled. It's a national holiday in France, his assistant Allison stammered. Every interpreter in the city is booked or out of office. Charles slammed his palm on the table. We need someone fluent. Now! And then from the hallway, barely audible through the open door, came a calm, melodic voice. Papa, tu as oublié ta clé à molette sur le chariot. Charles froze. He turned and saw a young black girl, no older than 12, handing a wrench to the janitor, Franklin Moore. She had just spoken fluent French. Allison followed his gaze, confused. That's Lena, Franklin's daughter. She's just waiting for him. School let out early today. But Charles wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the girl, who now stood quietly beside the cleaning cart, her eyes calm, her smile disarming. Could this child possibly be the answer? He stepped forward slowly. Mr. Moore, may I speak to your daughter for a moment? Allison whispered, Sir, are you serious? But Charles was already moving. Because when your company is about to collapse, hope doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears sneakers. Have you ever been saved by someone completely unexpected? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Damn it, this can't be happening. Charles Langford's voice cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. The usually composed CEO of Langford & Co. was sweating through his $3,000 suit, pacing like a man on the edge. In less than 45 minutes, executives from Société Médicale de Lyon would arrive for a meeting that could determine the company's survival. A $100 million contract hung in the balance. But the certified French interpreter had just canceled. Family emergency. Allison, he barked, find someone else. His assistant looked pale. Sir, I've called every agency. It's a French national holiday. No one's answering. Charles slammed both hands on the desk. Then we're finished. Suddenly, from the hallway, a soft, clear voice drifted into the room. Papa, tu as oublié ta clé à molette sur le chariot. Charles froze. He turned toward the open door. A girl, young, no more than 12, stood beside a cleaning cart, handing a wrench to the janitor. She had just spoken French. Perfect French. Who is that? Charles asked, barely above a whisper. Allison peeked through the door. That's Lena, Franklin's daughter. He's worked here for years. She must have come after school. Charles stared. Lena's uniform was plain, her backpack tattered, but her poise was unmistakable. There was intelligence in her eyes, and something else. Calm, unshaken strength. He stepped forward slowly. Franklin, may I speak with your daughter for a moment? Sir? The janitor blinked, startled. Charles didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl, because sometimes salvation doesn't walk in with a briefcase. Sometimes it arrives in sneakers, holding a wrench. Have you ever seen talent appear where no one expected it? Tell us your story in the comments. Lena stepped into the office, her small frame dwarfed by the towering windows and leather furniture. Charles gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She sat politely, folding her hands in her lap, eyes steady but unafraid. Lena, is it? He asked, clearing his throat. Yes, sir, she replied, her voice gentle but unwavering. You were speaking French just now. Where did you learn? My grandmother, Lena answered with a soft smile. She was from Haiti. She raised me in French until I was 6. Charles blinked. Impressive. Do you still speak fluently? Yes, sir. I also read and write fluently. I volunteer on weekends teaching French to Haitian immigrants at our church. Charles exchanged a glance with Allison, who had remained silently by the door, eyebrows raised. And how old are you? 12, Lena said simply. 13 in November. And you enjoy languages? Charles asked. Lena's eyes lit up. Very much. I also speak Spanish, German, and a little Mandarin. I'm learning Arabic next. Charles leaned back in his chair, processing this. And how do you know so much about our meeting today? Lena shrugged gently. Papa said something about a big French meeting at work. I was curious. So during break at school, I used the library to research Société Médicale de Lyon. I read about Mr. Dubois and Mr. Rousseau and how their company lost a child 2 years ago due to a failed diagnosis. Charles stared, stunned. How did you find that? Obituaries, interviews, translated news archives. She paused. Mr. Dubois had a daughter named Amélie. I thought it might matter to understand why he's investing so heavily in medical technology. A heavy silence fell over the room. Allison finally broke it. Sir, Lena is enrolled at Hawthorne Scholars Academy, full scholarship. She competes in academic debate against high school students and wins. Lena looked down modestly. I enjoy debate. I like solving problems with logic and compassion. Charles was quiet, the gears in his head turning. And you think you could interpret for us today? Yes, sir, Lena said. I can translate technical terms. I've read your company's white papers. There are some inconsistencies in your French documents, but I made notes. She reached into her worn backpack and handed him a folded sheet of paper filled with elegant handwriting and precise corrections. Charles read it. Then again, you corrected our certified translators? Just the medical terms. They matter, she said softly. The wrong word can cause the wrong diagnosis. For a moment, Charles forgot she was 12. Her tone was that of someone who had carried burdens beyond her years. Sir, Allison said gently, you asked for a miracle. I think you just found it. Mopping the floors. Charles stood near the window, gripping the correction sheet Lena had handed him. His jaw tightened, not in anger but disbelief. How had this girl, this child, done what his entire communications team couldn't? He turned back to her. Lena, do you know what's at stake in this meeting? Yes, sir, she replied calmly. Your company's future. Hundreds of jobs. A contract worth $100 million. Her tone wasn't theatrical. It was factual, grounded, like a surgeon explaining a diagnosis. And if it goes wrong? Charles asked, searching her face for a flicker of fear. Then it goes wrong, Lena said simply. But if it goes right, you'll have a new future. Sometimes that's what matters more than the risk. Mr. Langford, Allison interrupted gently, stepping forward. May I speak with you privately? Charles gave Lena a nod and stepped into the hallway with his assistant. This is madness, he whispered. I can't bet everything on a 12-year-old. With all due respect, sir, Allison replied, her voice firm. You've bet on worse. I know nothing about her. I do, Allison said. I grew up in the same neighborhood. Lena was reading chapter books in French by age 7. Her father may sweep our floors, but that girl has more raw intellect than half the boardroom. Charles looked back through the glass wall at Lena, who sat silently reviewing documents she had brought in her backpack. But she's just a child, he muttered. She's the only one who's prepared, Allison countered, and she's doing it because no one else can. Why didn't Franklin ever say anything? Charles asked. Allison's eyes narrowed. Did you ever ask? The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd always prided himself on being a fair boss, progressive even. But the truth? He'd never truly seen Franklin Moore. Not as a person, not as a father. Back in the office, Lena looked up. Mr. Langford? Yes. If I'm being honest, I don't think this is about whether I'm ready, she said. I think it's about whether you're ready to let someone unexpected help you. Charles felt the air shift in the room. It wasn't arrogance, just truth. A truth he hadn't wanted to face. He glanced at the clock. 25 minutes. Sir, Allison added softly, do you want to go down in history as the man who took a chance on genius? Or the one who walked away because it didn't wear the right shoes? Charles looked one last time at Lena. Small, composed, remarkable. And in that moment, he stopped seeing her age or her backpack or her father's uniform. He saw a mind sharper than most adults, a voice steady under pressure, and a rare gift hiding in plain sight. He turned back to Lena. All right, let's do this, on one condition. You don't just translate. You tell me the truth, every step of the way. Lena nodded. Deal. The office buzzed with urgency as the seconds slipped by. Charles Langford rubbed his forehead, trying to quiet the storm in his mind. Only 20 minutes remained. He turned to Lena, who was now reviewing the French executive's summary Allison had handed her. Are you familiar with this vocabulary? He asked. Lena's eyes stayed on the page, scanning quickly. Mostly, yes, but there are a few outdated terms. For instance, page 3 should say Système d'assistance diagnostique instead of intelligence medical. It's more precise in a clinical context. Charles blinked. You're correcting medical terminology? Yes, sir, she said without pause. My grandmother worked in a hospital in Port-au-Prince. She used to quiz me on French medical terms when I was little. She said, if words can harm, they can also heal. Choose them carefully. Allison turned to Charles. She's not just fluent, she's fluent with context. That's rare, even in professionals. Before Charles could respond, an assistant burst through the door. Mr. Langford, security says the French delegation just pulled into the parking garage. 10 minutes. The air thickened instantly. Lena closed the file and looked up. Mr. Langford, may I suggest something? Charles raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. When Mr. Dubois enters, don't start with business. Ask about his daughter. Charles hesitated. You mean Amelie? Yes, Lena nodded. I know it's personal, but it shows you see him as a human being, not just a decision maker. He's not investing in technology. He's investing in prevention, in redemption. For a moment, Charles saw her not as a child, but as a strategist. Her mind was 2 steps ahead, anticipating emotion, not just logic. You really researched him that deeply? Yes, sir, she said. While my classmates were playing games, I was reading interviews, investor reports, personal letters. I wanted to understand his why. Charles walked slowly to the window and stared at the city skyline. How had he missed this? How had the greatest mind in the building come from the janitor's daughter? He looked at Lena again. Why didn't you ever say anything before? Because no one ever asked, she answered, her voice quiet. You've passed my dad 100 times, Mr. Langford. Always polite, but never curious. The words hit him like a mirror. All his progressive values, exposed as surface deep. Franklin Moore, the man who worked quietly every night, had raised a miracle, and Charles had never looked close enough to see it. Lena, he said, voice lower now, you do understand what happens if this goes wrong? Yes, sir. 200 jobs gone. A public failure. A headline in the Business Herald. And if it goes right, she smiled gently, then they'll never see you the same again. And maybe they'll never see girls like me the same again either. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime that echoed like a bell of fate. The French executives stepped out. Philippe Dubois, composed but grieving, and Etienne Rousseau, sharp-eyed and skeptical. Charles Langford stood, but before he could speak, Lena stepped forward, her voice clear, confident, and utterly disarming. Bonjour, Monsieur Dubois et Rousseau, she said fluently. Je suis Amélie Williams. Je serai votre interprète aujourd'hui. J'espère que votre vol s'est bien passe. A stunned silence filled the air. Dubois blinked, his composure faltering. Mon Dieu, votre accent est parfait. Où avez-vous appris le français, mademoiselle? Ma grand-mère était haïtienne, Lena answered softly. Elle m'a élevé en français. Elle disait toujours que c'était la langue du cœur. Dubois knelt slightly to her level, emotion rising. Quel est votre nom? Amélie, monsieur. Comme votre fille. The name struck him like lightning. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and when he opened them, his voice broke. Merci. The meeting began. Lena stood between the two worlds, executives and engineers, sorrow and hope, and translated not only words but intentions, pain, and vision. Every technical term, every nuance, was spoken with clarity and grace. When Dubois raised questions about ethical implications in AI diagnostics, Lena didn't just translate. She conveyed the weight of what was truly being asked. Mr. Dubois wants to know if your system can catch anomalies, ones that could cost lives, like the one that took his daughter. Charles responded with unshaken conviction. Our technology exists to prevent that very thing. It empowers doctors, not replaces them. Lena's voice softened. Chaque fois que cette technologie sauve un enfant, votre fille vivra à travers cet acte d'amour. That was the moment Dubois broke. The multimillionaire who rarely showed emotion in negotiations now wiped silent tears from his face. The air shifted. Rousseau, once skeptical, leaned forward with curiosity, then admiration. For 40 minutes, Lena was more than a translator. She was the soul of the conversation. She anticipated, contextualized, and most of all, humanized. By the time the meeting ended, the decision was unanimous. Dubois stood, composed himself, and said, "We are not investing $190 million. We are investing $280 million, and we would like Amali to be our official ambassador." Rousseau nodded. "This child understands purpose better than any adult I've met." Charles was speechless. The meeting that could have ended in public failure had instead become a revolution. Lena simply smiled and packed her papers, as if saving a company and healing a grieving father were just part of her after-school routine. 6 months later, the transformation was visible the moment you walked through the glass doors of Langford and Cumber. Gone were the silent corridors and the cold executive energy. In their place was a new heartbeat, one that began with a portrait. Mounted in the lobby, framed in gold and softly lit, was a photo of Lena Williams, now 13, smiling modestly beneath the title, Youngest Corporate Ambassador in American History. Visitors from Japan, France, and Brazil lined up for meetings she led with grace that rivaled seasoned diplomats. On one particularly crisp morning, Charles stood by the window of his office, watching Lena guide a group of Japanese executives through a presentation, speaking fluent Japanese, which she had casually picked up in the months after the historic meeting. "It's surreal, isn't it?" Allison said as she entered, dropping a thick file of quarterly growth reports on his desk. 400% revenue increase. Harvard and Stanford are doing case studies on her. Charles shook his head in quiet awe. "And to think, I nearly let all this slip away because I never thought to ask who Franklin Moore's daughter really was." In the months following the deal, Charles had promoted Franklin from janitor to operations supervisor. "Your daughter saved this company," Charles had said, "and it's time everyone sees where she came from." Franklin had only nodded, eyes moist, voice quiet. "She's always been this way, Mr. Langford. Now someone's finally paying attention." Lena, despite the global attention, remained unchanged. She still returned to her old neighborhood every evening, helped her father with dinner, and taught French to immigrant families at the community church. When asked by Forbes why she turned down luxury endorsements and private school offers, her response was simple: "If money can't help the people who helped you, it's just paper." The quote went viral. CEOs across the country reevaluated their hiring practices. Charles received hundreds of letters, some critical, most admiring, acknowledging the uncomfortable truth: talent was hiding in plain sight. If only people looked beyond suits and resumes. Then came the unexpected call. Charles Hampton, CEO of rival Morrison Corp., waiting nervously in the lobby. He had just lost 3 major contracts, all negotiated by Lena. "Langford," Hampton said, fidgeting, "I underestimated you. I underestimated her. We've been hiring from the same 5 prep schools for 20 years. And now, I need help." Charles leaned forward, thoughtful. "Lena will help," he said, "but she'll want something more meaningful than a consultant fee." He was right. Lena agreed to consult, on the condition that Morrison Corporation created a $5 million scholarship fund for inner-city students with hidden talents. "The world doesn't need another genius in a suit," she said during their first meeting. "It needs people who see genius where others see janitors' kids." That evening, as Charles watched Lena explain AI ethics to a room full of Chinese investors, he realized he was no longer leading his company. He was following the girl who once walked in wearing sneakers and carrying a wrench. On a rainy spring morning, as clouds rolled gently over the city skyline, Charles Langford sat quietly in the back of the company's new innovation hall, watching Lena, now seated confidently at a round table with international executives, speak fluent Mandarin without hesitation. The 13-year-old had just finalized another strategic expansion, this time into East Asia. Her voice was steady, her arguments sharp, and her empathy unwavering. Beside her sat her father, Franklin, now fully embraced as a respected leader in operations. As Lena clicked through the final slide of her presentation, showcasing how AI and diagnostic medicine had saved over 200 lives in the past 6 months, she paused and looked out at the room. "We didn't just build technology," she said. "We built trust because someone dared to believe in someone like me." Applause erupted, But Charles didn't clap immediately. He was overcome by something else: gratitude, pride, and a quiet shame for how close he'd come to missing her. Later that day, Lena stopped by Charles's office, still in her school uniform, her patched backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mr. Langford," she said with a grin, "the Prime Minister of Canada wants a demo. Tomorrow morning. Should I schedule it?" Charles chuckled, waving his hand. "You run the place now, Lena." She tilted her head. "No, sir. I just remind it to listen better." As she turned to leave, Charles stopped her. "Lena, may I ask you something? How do you keep your heart so grounded, even with the whole world watching?" She smiled. "Because I remember when no one was watching." That night, Charles updated the company's official motto, placing Lena's words on the front wall. "Genius is everywhere, just not always where you expect." And across the globe, more companies followed suit. But perhaps the greatest change wasn't in profits or expansion, it was in vision. In the way people began to look twice at the quiet ones, the overlooked, the unseen. Because now they knew. Sometimes the person who saves your company walks in wearing worn-out shoes and speaks 6 languages. Sometimes they're 12. And sometimes the future is hidden in the hallway, just waiting for someone to ask the right question. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more true stories about how the most extraordinary people are often hiding in plain sight.